Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. A rescue operation is underway in Nigeria Wednesday following the collapse of a building in Lagos. As many as 100 children and many others are feared trapped in the rubble, according to Ibrahim Farinleye, spokesman for Nigeria's National Emergency Management Agency Southwest Region. So far, officials have not provided any casualty figures. Residents say about 100 children attend the school, which was on the third floor of the building. Video shows a child being rescued from the twisted concrete and metal debris. At least 7 children have been rescued from the building, according to residents. Workers on top of the rubble frantically shoveled debris away as thousands of people swarmed around the rescue site. Nigeria is frequently hit by building collapses due to weak enforcement of building regulations and often the use of poor construction materials. Now to the latest on that Ethiopian Airlines crash. A company spokesman says no bodies will be recovered from the site where Flight 302 crashed because only fragmented remains survived the impact. On Wednesday, Ethiopian Airlines said the flight data recorders from the passenger jet that plunged to the earth Sunday will be sent to Europe for analysis. We get more in this report from Anna Bevan. Well, it looks like we don't have that story at the moment. But there are growing calls now for the U.S. government to ground the Boeing 737 MAX 8 since 2 of the jets have crashed within 6 months, killing all on board. Several dozen countries have now banned the plane, but so far the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration has only ordered the American jetliner manufacturer to upgrade the plane software. And here's VOA's White House correspondent Pasiwida Kuswara. Well, we'll get to that hopefully in a moment. But the Algerian government is now declaring itself ready for talks with protesters seeking rapid political change, saying Wednesday it has sought a ruling system based on the will of the people. This comes after opposition groups rejected previous proposed reforms as inadequate. Monday, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika reversed his decision to seek a 5th term in the face of weeks of mass rallies by protesters fed up with authoritarian rule and decades of economic and political stagnation. Bouteflika's initiative has failed to satisfy many Algerians who continue to want the power to move to a younger generation with fresh ideas. School teachers are striking Wednesday in several cities and were joined by other Algerians. Tens of thousands of people from all social classes have demonstrated over the last 3 weeks against corruption and employment and ruling class dominated by the military and veterans of the 1954 to 1962 independence war against France. Now, the protests have shaken up a long declining political scene marked by decades of social and economic malaise. Well, we are going back to where we began, talking about the Ethiopian plane that crashed, and we want to go back and bring you that story where we are now being informed that the data, the black box that has the data on the plane will be sent to Europe for further analysis.
Ethiopian Airlines says it will send the black boxes from its crashed Boeing 737 MAX 8 overseas to be analysed. Ethiopia doesn't have the capacity to examine the black box voice and data recorders itself and will reportedly send them to Europe to find out what caused Sunday's crash of the passenger jet travelling from Addis Ababa to Nairobi that killed 157 people. On Wednesday, an airline spokesman said the pilot of the crashed plane had reported flight control problems and asked to return. It's the second fatal accident involving the newly launched 737 MAX 8 aircraft in 5 months. The pilot of Sunday's deadly incident was trained on the Boeing 737 MAX 8 after October's crash in Indonesia, according to the airline. No link has been proven between the 2 crashes, but a growing number of nations, including the European Union, have suspended flights of the aircraft following concerns about the plane's safety. Adding to pressure on Boeing, Norwegian Air said Wednesday it will seek compensation from the US plane maker after grounding its fleet of the 737 MAX 8 aircraft. Boeing says it has full confidence in the safety of the aircraft and, for now, the US Federal Aviation Administration and US airlines are standing by Boeing and keeping the plane in the air, says Reuters correspondent Eric Johnson.
U.S. carriers so far are saying, well, we're waiting for more data, we're carefully monitoring the situation. At this point, there's no data that's been released that links the two incidents, the Lion Air and the Ethiopian Airlines disaster. People are carefully watching it. Boeing pointed out in a statement this morning, it respects the decision of various nations to ground their fleets and will work with them, providing technical consulting or any other information they need as the investigation plays out.
For the grieving families, it could be some time before they get any answers. Ethiopian Airlines said it would take at least 5 days to start handing the remains of those killed back to their families. But it could be weeks or months before all victims are identified.
Well, that's reporter Anna Bevan of Reuters with that report. Now, as we just mentioned, several dozen countries have now banned the plane, but so far the U.S. has only ordered the American jetliner manufacturer to upgrade their plane software. And here's that report by VOA's White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara.
Families still grieving for victims of Ethiopian Air Flight 302 that plunged minutes after takeoff from Addis Ababa on Sunday, killing all 157 people on board. The White House says the U.S. government is on the early stages of investigation.
At least 8 U.S. citizens were among the victims. We are working with the government of Ethiopia and Ethiopian Airlines to offer all possible assistance.
Several dozen countries have banned the Boeing 737 MAX 8 after 2 of the jets crashed within 6 months. A Lion airplane crashed in Indonesia on October 29th, killing 189 on board. Investigations will take months, but early indications show similar circumstances between the crashes. Aviation expert Calasius Bekele.
Aviation experts are questioning the reliability of this MAX aircraft, especially particularly on its flight control equipment. They are not questioning or doubting the safety of Ethiopian Airlines.
The Federal Aviation Administration has declared the 737 MAX 8 safe to fly and said it has ordered Boeing to upgrade the jet's software by April. But a number of senators have called for U.S. authorities to ban the plane, including Republican Mitt Romney.
Out of an abundance of safety concerns and common sense, I think it makes sense to ground the aircraft until we have better information.
Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren went a step further in calling on Congress to investigate whether the Trump administration is protecting the American aviation giant. President Trump, meanwhile, has complained via Twitter that planes are becoming too complex to fly. In a statement, Boeing said it has full confidence in the safety of the 737 MAX 8, the newest versions of its best-selling jet. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
At the height of the Sudanese government's bombing campaign in the country's Nuba Mountains, a doctor from the U.S. state of New York refused to leave when all other doctors and most medical staff were airlifted out. While the day-to-day fighting has stopped in the area, the struggle to provide adequate medical treatment for people who live in crisis zones like the Nuba region continues. Kyra Van Dam recently caught up with a Mother of Mercy Hospital director, Dr. Tom Katiner, and has this report.
For the past 2 years, there has been no new fighting or aerial bombardment of the Nuba Mountains, something that had happened on a near-daily basis for 6 years. But Dr. Tom Katina, who runs the Mother of Mercy Hospital, the only hospital in the Nuba Mountains region, says that doesn't mean the people are now safe.
So what happened was both sides issued unilateral ceasefires, and the Khartoum government has respected it. Now, having said that, I would still consider us as in a state of civil war because the battle lines are still drawn. There's not, the Sudan People's SPLA North soldiers are still there. The Sudan Army government is still ringed around us.
Talks were supposed to take place in Ethiopia over the last several months between the government and the Sudan People's Liberation Army North, or SPLM North. But similar peace talks that had been held in the past produced no tangible results.
There was not really any common ground. They wanted one of two things. Their position was, one, what they wanted first was a secular government with no Sharia law, where parties had equal representation, there were free and fair elections, that people were not marginalized, that the African tribes were not treated as second-class citizens, everyone had equal rights. Some things that are a bit nebulous, and these things had to be enshrined in the Constitution somehow.
But that didn't happen, and the talks failed. And now Bashir has an even bigger problem on his hands. Since mid-December, Sudan has been hit by hundreds of protests over rising prices and the collapsing economy. Demonstrators are calling for the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir. Officials say 30 people have died in protest-related violence so far, but Human Rights Watch says more than 50 people have been killed.
Most of the deaths have been from sniper shots. So, I've seen pictures on Facebook. The government's trying to shut down internet and media outlets. A little bit of news has been leaking out. But I've seen pictures of, snipers perched up on rooftops doing headshots on some of the protesters. So they're trying to avoid kind of mass killings because they don't want that condemnation from the outside. But if you, have a big protest and they hear the gunshot and then a few guys drop with bullet holes in the head, that's going to scatter the crowd pretty quickly. So this has been their technique to try to little by little discourage the protesters.
Katina says although the protests have distracted Bashir and he no longer bombs civilians living in the Nuba Mountains, the conflict between the government and the SPLA North in the area continues, and the Mother of Mercy Hospital still struggles to keep up with the needs of its patients.
The other problems are still there. The cancers, the hernias, the people that need, women that need hysterectomy, bleeding problems, they tend to stay at home. They're afraid to even get on the road. There's no transport. They often stay at home. And quite frankly, they often die at home. Now, when the fighting slows down or stops, people feel a little more free to come out, and they come to the hospital. So we get a lot of patients with all of the other problems.
The kinds of problems that are typical of the tropical world: malaria, TB, leprosies, pneumonias, and cancers. Katina received the prestigious Aurora Humanitarian Award in 2017 from the Armenian community for staying with the people of Nuba during the worst of the fighting. In 2018, he'd been asked to be the face of the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, which was created to inspire those who have received aid in time of crisis to express gratitude by offering the same kind of assistance to someone else. Dr. Katina is currently touring the United States and Europe to tell his story, hoping to convince others to help the people who put their lives at risk every day in countries at war. Carol Van Dam for VOA News, Washington.
The U.S. State Department releases its annual report on human rights issues Wednesday. A senior official told VOA one of the issues featured in the report is the case of Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang province. The U.S. and other Western governments, as well as human rights groups, have accused China of detaining Uyghurs and other Muslims in internment camps meant to purge their religious and cultural identity. Samuel Brandbach, the U.S. ambassador for religious freedom, said last Friday during a speech in Hong Kong that China's detentions are not proportionate to any real threat it faces from extremism.
Since April 2017, mainland authorities have detained more than 1 million ethnic Muslims. They have targeted and forcibly relocated to internment camps Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and members of other Muslim minority groups. Family members do not know the whereabouts of their loved ones or even whether they are dead or alive.
Well, China says it is running a de-radicalization program and that the camps are vocational training centers to teach people about the law and the Mandarin language. Chinese authorities say the camps in Xinjiang will gradually disappear if a time arises when society does not need them. U.S. lawmakers are pressuring the Trump administration to take stronger action against China. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the administration is considering sanctions against Chinese officials responsible for rights abuses against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. U.S. federal investigators have uncovered a scheme designed to help wealthy Americans cheat their children's way into elite American colleges. Federal prosecutors in Boston Tuesday charged 50 people in connection with the illegal plot, including William Rick Singer, the ringleader charged with running the racketeering scam through a fake charity named Age College and Career Network. Also charged were Hollywood actresses, coaches, and college administrators. VOA's Laditza Hoke has our report.
A central defendant in the alleged scheme, William Singer, pleaded guilty in Boston federal court on Tuesday to charges of racketeering conspiracy, money laundering conspiracy, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and obstruction of justice. Singer is a central figure in what federal prosecutors call the largest ever college admissions fraud scam unearthed in the United States.
We've charged 50 people nationwide with participating in a conspiracy that involved, first, cheating on college entrance exams, meaning the SAT and the ACT, and second, securing admission to elite colleges by bribing coaches at those schools to accept certain students under false pretenses.
U.S. Attorney Andrew Lelling said 9 coaches at elite schools such as Yale in Connecticut and Georgetown in Washington, D.C. were charged with accepting bribes to fabricate athletic credentials for certain applicants who did not have them. 33 parents were charged with paying enormous sums to guarantee their children's admission to prestigious schools through the use of bribes and fake academic and athletic credentials. Among them were Hollywood actresses Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin from popular American television shows.
These parents are a catalog of wealth and privilege. They include, for example, CEOs of private and public companies, successful securities and real estate investors, 2 well-known actresses, a famous fashion designer, and the co-chairman of a global law firm. Based on the charges unsealed today, all of them knowingly conspired with Singer and others to help their children either cheat on the SAT or ACT and or buy their children's admission to elite schools through fraud.
Clients paid Singer anywhere between $100,000 and $6.5 million to guarantee their children's admission to elite universities. In total, he received about $25 million between 2011 and 2018. FBI Special Agent Joe Bonavolonta led the operation to uncover the scheme.
Our investigation began last May after we uncovered evidence of a large-scale, elaborate fraud while working an unrelated undercover operation.
Law enforcement and justice officials said there can be no separate college admissions or separate criminal justice for the wealthy. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCord. Still ahead on Africa 54, how an isolated Canadian town on the U.S. border became a draw for asylum seekers. But first, a look at Wednesday's headlines.
It's about 30% down from last year.
One other point where the borders, U.S. states of North Dakota and Minnesota come together is the tiny Canadian town of Emerson, Manitoba. As the United States has tightened some immigration rules over the past few years, hundreds of people have illegally crossed the border there to seek asylum in Canada. In part one of our three-part series, Taking Flight, VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young visited this isolated place to see the situation firsthand.
All along the border between the United States and Canada, no walls or barbed wire fences mark where the two nations come together, just a cleared space. Right on the border is Emerson, Manitoba, a town of just over 600 people, but a magnet for those seeking asylum in Canada. Sergeant Corey Myers is with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
During the summer months, our numbers are generally higher. In the dead of winter, the numbers will go down.
Myers says about 1,000 people illegally crossed into Canada at Emerson in 2017, many of them Somalis coming from the U.S. city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, 640 kilometers to the south. Across Canada last year, more than 18,000 people illegally entered to claim asylum. Those who cross the border to Canada at Emerson officially do so at a major U.S. highway just west of town. But unofficially, some will try to go up the Red River, which runs through the town, or walk along the railroad tracks, both headed to Winnipeg. For a short stretch east of Emerson, the international boundary is a dirt road. The real barrier to reaching Emerson from the U.S. is the weather, especially in winter. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agent Aaron Heitke.
Oftentimes what we've seen in the last few years is they pick the worst possible weather, and when you talk about the worst possible weather in North Dakota, it's 35, 40 below zero. It's a 60-mile-an-hour wind, and so frostbite, hypothermia is a very significant risk.
Not just in winter. In June 2017, 57-year-old Ghanaian Mavis Ototie died from hypothermia. Her body was found in a field south of the Canadian border. CPP agent Heike says she was brought there by a human trafficker. Sadly, he says, she could have entered Canada legally. On both sides, officers try to make sure people survive if they are found crossing the border illegally.
Once we get them out of the elements, then we will formally arrest them for illegally entering Canada and take them into our custody.
Then they are moved to the province's capital, Winnipeg, to await hearings on their asylum requests. Many of those asylum seekers and others immigrating to Canada are helped in Winnipeg by the Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council, a nonprofit advocacy group that addresses the legal, housing, and employment needs of asylum seekers. Their welcome place is covered in the next segment of Taking Flight.
Well, joining me now to discuss his three-part Taking Flight series is VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young. Jeff, welcome to Africa 54. And start by sharing with us your experience of being there and really walking that route.
Vince, to get an idea as to what it's like for Somalis and the other people who try to enter Canada illegally, I went to Emerson, Manitoba, this little town of 622 people, and I stayed there for days. And part of my experience there was crossing back over to the U.S. side and parking my car several kilometers south of the Canadian border and walking the fields in the middle of the night, walking the railroad tracks, walking the banks of the Red River, where one Somali a couple of years ago swam to a new life in Canada by swimming in the river until he crossed to the Canadian side.
What are some of the risks that you witnessed there? I mean, someone may think it's a river, I know how to swim, I can do it, I can walk across.
Well, you've got the weather. Your weather's the biggest enemy. When I was there, the weather was above zero. But in the middle of winter, and winter in that part of the United States and Canada, winter starts in October and it ends in April. And we're talking about, at its worst, minus 40. And these people are brought to just below the border, a couple of kilometers below the border, and they're just kicked out of the car by the human traffickers or whoever brought them there. And then they walk through the fields. They walk along the banks of the river, and it's the middle of the night, and they freeze. People die.
And it's so sad, and we look forward to more of your reporting that Jeffrey Young, our senior analyst, we'll have more on how the Somalis and others seek asylum in Canada. The Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council in Winnipeg as we saw, provides everything from temporary housing to legal services. In Thursday's part 2 of our series, Taking Flight, Jeff visits the Immigration Council's Welcome Place. So be sure to visit Africa 54's Facebook page to learn more about this series. And each day following Africa 54, each segment will also be posted on YouTube. Well, here's what's trending now. Brandishing a paintbrush in her snout, Picasso enthusiastically tosses her head to create bright, bold strokes across a canvas propped up in her sty. The saw was rescued from an abattoir as a piglet and brought to an animal sanctuary in Franschhoek in South Africa's Western Cape region in 2016, where her new owner noticed her love of color and paintbrushes. Picasso's paintings can sell for almost $4,000, with the proceeds going to animal welfare. She has even had one of her artworks turned into a watch face for Swiss watchmaker Swatch. The limited edition Flying Pig by Miss Picasso features green, blue, and pink brush strokes and sells for $120. Last year, her pieces were shown in South Africa, the UK, France, Germany, and the Netherlands. And that's what's trending today. Now, the first and only Kenyan ice hockey team continues to defy the odds by playing and practicing the sport in the only solid ice rink in Eastern and Central Africa. This pioneer team is now inspiring a new generation of ice hockey players who hope to expand the sport in Kenya. Rylan Boer reports from Nairobi.
Training takes place 3 times a week at this solar ice rink. It is here at Kenya's Bonari Sky Center that the Kenya Ice Lions, the first ice hockey team in Kenya, was formed. Tim Colby moved to Nairobi from Ottawa in 2010 to work for the Canadian High Commission. Several months later, he would help train and coach Kenya's first ice hockey team.
Years ago, a few of the Kenyans really wanted to take it up, step it up a notch, play a lot more seriously, attract more people, and get into real hockey games. So we took it on with a few other Americans, Canadians, Slovaks, Swedes, and others. We started helping out a bit, but soon it didn't take long for the Kenyans to take it all over themselves.
Up to last year, the Ice Lions still did not have another team to play. So the Canadian restaurant chain Tim Hortons brought members of the team to play their first real game against a team of firefighters from Toronto. 18-year-old Gideon Mutua was part of the team, and he says ice hockey has changed his life forever.
My biggest dream is to play in NHL, whereby you get paid just to play. So, but one day I think my dream will be fulfilled.
It is in the young players where the future of Kenya ice hockey lies.
This used to be about 10.
Fascinating. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a good night. That's our show.